Hello and welcome to another installment of the Forest Park Town Hall podcast. Our guest this week, I'm going to let him introduce himself, but you'll see him as Robert Cox on the Forest Park Town Hall page. And Bob and I have known each other a long time. Consider him a decent acquaintance. But Bob, why don't you introduce yourself and let people know where you're coming from?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for inviting me tonight. So I'm a lifelong resident, so it's about 72 seasons I've been living in Forest Park. I've been involved with this zoning question probably for about 30 years now, and I got more involved. Interestingly enough, I went back to university at UIC and graduated with a bachelor in urban planning and public affairs in 2010. So I've been promoting and advocating for a long time with prior administration and presently, and I'm interested in doing a couple different things, but trying to basically just observe what the pulse is for this topic in Forest Park.
Okay, thanks for that. The meeting was we're taping this on Thursday, the day after the meeting that Commissioner Nero held, and there was a great turnout. I want to say 40 or so people. The meeting was Commissioner Nero kind of did an intro, and then Steve Glinke kind of took it from there. And I'd say the crowd was about well, they were confused because I don't think they understand the basis of what they were trying to do, which is rezone some things that are not in compliance. But as we both know, Forest Park has long been known legal nonconforming as a phrase that you hear too often. And what ended up happening for the folks that weren't there is Steve Glinke kind of just was spinning yarns and wasn't presenting any data. So that left people kind of confused of just hearing kind of anecdotal stories, nothing backed up with kind of the data. And I think people, my discussions on the way out the door were at least, where's the data? So Bob, I'll turn to you on this. There's the main discussions. People are like, what's the density versus occupying every piece of land in town, building up on every piece of land in town, and to cram as many people in it. I know you have particular thoughts on density and whether or not it's good for Forest Park. So let's start there.
Okay, well, density certainly is an important topic. However, when I observe, and just as from a planner's perspective, a lot of these topics, really important stuff, public safety, public health, density, flooding, safety, are all sometimes at least described in a formal, comprehensive village plan. Includes a comprehensive plan, but it's articulated. And I think what the confusion in Forest Park is, number one, and I want to stress this, we are using an archaic called Euclidean zoning that we got in the 1920s. And basically we amend it. And then our other application is an ad hoc method of village council approving. That's unique to Forest Park. The system is old. I believe it's a systematic failure that has got us to this point. People have to understand that most of the buildings over 100 years old were built prior to the zoning, but also all the stuff that's built afterwards, 60s and 70s, became over the zoning that we have. So changing the zoning is a good idea. And I just want to say real briefly, because I've spoke with Commissioner Nero. I support him and other commissioners supporting it back in January, both my wife and I, because mainly nothing else was in the pan. In fact, it dragged its leg, and we felt at least a little bit of a change would inspire, either would fail or do well. But at this point, I think we can discuss what might be better alternatives. But I'm glad people came out there because I think there is a significant growing number of people who want to talk about this.
And say it gets rezoned and what they're trying to achieve is not just getting things in compliance, but and even Glinke kind of alluded to it, which is allowing properties to be maximized for occupancy, which means, building modern two flats, turning garages into apartments as well. How is that good for the village? Because the consensus in the room last night, at least from what I can gather from the questions, was I heard 3 people, maybe 4 people in support of the idea of allowing that kind of density, bringing back in carriage houses if they're partnered with garages and
Sure, and
new
that's a
modern
topic I
two-plants.
really have a lot of data on, that I
So,
can speak to and actually, so what we call a ADU or an extra unit put on back, significant to me since I alluded that I'm already 72, I'm a senior citizen. I have a house in Michigan, and it's mainly because I don't think I can retire in Forest Park. But if I had a rental income on my property, it would ease the pain of the property tax. So other communities use that format. I don't think planners necessarily go into a village plan with the idea of either fearing density or wanting density. It's appropriate to know, first of all, the inventory of housing that we have, and second of all, to know that we have a housing shortage. We have a low amount of selection for first-time home buyers. First-time home buyers and um, uh, low-income housing are two different topics. And when you float these ideas around, especially with density, you're going to get people with a negative perception or a positive perception. But I'll go back to say that the system that we have doesn't address any of that. It's just a classification system. So what would be necessary would be a full, flat-out reapproach to resetting what kind of zoning we have, maybe switching to form zoning or a hybrid, and building all the things that we need now and also all the things that we wanted to go forward in the future for growth without anticipating error. So I think with people, when they say density, they probably think of the tenements in New York or a ghetto or Soviet-style apartments, and it's not the case. So those are things that won't be resolved until we actually have that discussion. And so far, no one's calling for it. I wish the village would call for it. I have an inkling they might, which is something different that I had heard 6 months ago or even 3 months ago, but it's only speculation. And I do some back channeling every once in a while, Chris, and it's hard to get any firm information. Steve Glinky's in a tough position, but at the same time, he's not a urban planner. His expertise probably in, I don't mean this to be harsh, but in public engagement is uh, is adequate, but it's not something that I think maybe the village should choose another spokesperson for. And that could be the village administrator, it could be the mayor, it could be, other commissioners. But so I hope that kind of addresses. So you can't just address density on its own and then backtrack into planning. You have to start the planning system first and then address your density in a real comprehensive manner. So what kind of houses would you have if you wanted density? Would they be two flats? Would they be just, 4 stories? Would they be townhouses? There's all sorts of types. And our zoning doesn't tell you what you can do. It just tells you what you can't build. So that's always been a problem too. Um, so density is one of those things, either fear it or you understand it and you fear it less, but it's certainly something that builds the economy and wants to give less the opportunity that people come into Forest Park. Um, I'll shoot to something that's more extreme. We've had a decline in school population over the last 40 years. That's incredible. No one seems to want to take up the banner and saying why. But you and I know, we both experienced, you buy a house with a family and in sixth grade you leave because of the so-called high school issue, which again, I've worked on and seen, the realities from that. So that's the idea. So what would you think from the meeting you went last night was some of the really questions that weren't addressed properly that maybe we can refocus and get the village to give us better information? Do you think they're transparent about this process, Chris?
As seems like anything out of Village Hall is always lacking a bit of transparency. I mean, I appreciate the meeting last night, and you
Mm,
talk about Steve Glinky's expertise. I mean, his expertise is in firefighting, if we're going to be honest, and that's not a
yes.
knock on him. He was a very good fire chief, and he kind of went into this role. It was supposed to be part time, and then it became his second full time job in a second life. And Steve Wood admitted last night that he doesn't have a degree in planning or anything along those lines, which we appreciate the honesty, I think of. Um, and from what I got last night, the explanation on density, I mean, everyone's, I mean, you kind of just led to it. You're not you the Forest Park is now empty nesters from Oak Park looking for cheaper properties and smaller properties. Families aren't growing and staying, which we've all known about. So your population decrease comes when you still have housing in high demand. And what are people actually looking for? I asked the question to Glinky last night: how many standalone single family houses have been built in his 15 years versus townhouses and condos? And he said, well, it was five or six, I believe, something like that. Is that the housing stock that we want? If you're looking for rich or affluent Oak Parkers looking for a nice property, we're just shoving them into the townhomes, which we talked about stormwater being an issue and covering up the land with that. But we're talking about the waste part of the sewers too, and we know most of our sewers are still combined. So when you shove a townhouse with how many families in it in a place where it could be one home, obviously you're taxing a ancient sewer system. So let's talk about density from that perspective, and Forest Park specifically, where we have always had problems with the combined sewer system. And yes, it's separated in some parts of town, and there's been some relief in years. But how does in the world of density, when you have a sewer system that can't handle, how does that weigh into it from your professional perspective?
Well, Chris, you were a commissioner and you're familiar with some of the internal allies or sources that the village use. And are you familiar with Burke Engineering?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. Well, Mr. Burke is a really highly regarded specialist in hydrology, I guess they call it at UIC. He's got a building named after him. And I think what might be surprising to people is that there's not a lot of data that says our ancient system is beyond capacity with deep tunnel and things like that. What people don't know, or maybe don't know about enough, is that where I live, that 400 block of Marengo, originally the Carney farmhouse that went back 40 acres was all wetlands. It was all swamp. It was drained because it's low lands. It's kind of like Westchester. They're built on a swamp, a floodplain. And then there's other underwater things. So the flooding issue is due to some other factors. Probably the most important is impervious topping surfaces like concrete and asphalt parking lots that push this velocity of water that's beyond the capacity of what the drainage can be. And they give analogies in urban planning about, the overflowing bathtub, and you took the drain out, water's coming too much velocity that exceeds the water that's escaping. So I don't necessarily know if that directly correlates. So building more property from an urban planning idea would be is if it's properly built, if a building doesn't encroach on another neighbor by doing something that throws water in their land, and that's built in code. So again, it goes back to what do we want to have as restrictions and regulations? What would be good for the whole neighborhood so we don't have those problems? And just another side thing, because I don't want to dominate this because you asked good questions, Chris, is that they had a program about 20 years ago, and it was a subsidy from the Village of Forest Park that allowed you to get a private company to dig a hole and put a cistern in front. It took me 3 years to get it, and I think they allowed a $1,500 subsidy, and it was maybe an $8,000 project. I've had that system, and I've never had flooding since. So there are alternatives that can happen, and it wasn't caused from. I mean, I'm surrounded by multifamily dwelling on my block that's been there since the 60s. It wasn't from anything else coming in as far as new construction. I don't think that's the approach we want to have. Again, you want to go back and say, for sure, that we don't want density nuisances like flooding be a part of our plan. And our plan should say, this is what you need to do to offset that. So that's my opinion on that. But again, I can see why people would be concerned. It's not fun to, mop up or have sewage go in your basement. And it ends up there's a lot of seepage problems. You have a lot of old houses that just our foundations need help. Wouldn't it be great if you could have a subsidy program, senior citizen? I'm going to have my house reshored up. They're going to pay a half and half program like sidewalks. But we're so stressed economically now, we can't even do those things. So, I mean, it's just really kind of the inertia of the times. I hope that kind of answers your
Yeah,
question. I don't know if it.
it kind of brings me to my next question, but just to put a button on what you're talking about, you do that at your house, but that doesn't solve your neighbor's problem. And
Mm,
the things we could do as a community to solve it is, you know, the village would be talking out of both sides of their mouth the way they say it doesn't matter how much ground we cover, yet why are we getting grants and doing permeable surfaces in lots and in alleys? Obviously, because it works. Allowing the water to slowly seep back into the ground is a great winner for anti-flooding. That's everybody knows it, and the village does it, and they put up signs applauding themselves with Burke Engineering on these alleys now that they're producing, and I'm all for these alleys. I think they're fantastic. Um, Always tried to get grants when I was on the council for them as well. They're hard to come by, and those alleys
Mhm.
cost more than just throwing down concrete in an alley. So that takes me to part two, which is, and Blinky brought it up last night, which is, and you had mentioned it, the village is so financially strained right now, and he was selling this as a source of income for the village via property taxes, is to cram as many people as possible into the village, which should not be the residents' issue when the village council has not been fiscally sound over the last so many years.
Mhm.
And one car dealership will produce more income for the city than putting up a condo unit. So
Mhm.
let me throw that part at you, and ask your opinion at least
Well,
on, should the village, on the back of the residents, and again, there were people there that were absolutely fine with adding more to the population of Forest Park. Personally, I think we're kind of maxed out in a lot of areas, and I don't want to see undeveloped areas like the Altenheim be developed into housing when we're already at a lower level green space per person than is recommended for mental health reasons. That's just me. But I'm sorry. Let me allow you to have the floor here and comment.
well, again, those are all important things that for some reason never get really answered properly. And there's really, so who's, answering the questions, who's leading the, uh, the data? And the Forest Park has not had a culture of planning in its history forever. In fact, I remember at one time in the 70s and 80s, I had a small bakery business in Madison Street. We had a really autocratic building inspector. I know I would give him coffee cakes and we'd get our stuff done when I was doing construction in the area where Jimmy's restaurant was. And nobody cared. No, the village council never worked on it. This guy approved everything or disapproved it. So I think where you need to focus on it is that all the people, all the stakeholders, and the leadership, we need to connect those two entities so we can say, hey, here's a scheduled time for between June and August. We're going to open up these meetings to talk about what we want and what we know we're not getting from the present zoning. Then we can address all those problems what are the five most important problems that we need to take care of. And I think too that because of the fact that you're going through that process, that initiates a kind of a safety net for investors coming in. Now, I've always, 20 years ago, 30, 25 years ago, I had a real paranoia about developers. But when I learned about what developers do, what their profit margin is, and how they operate, developers want to do good stuff because they want more work in a particular village. They don't want to come in and just rape the village and leave out. Cramming a lot of people in a building, I think, is probably not a original expression I would use. It would just be optimizing. I mean, you're familiar with neighborhood development where you do hubs where there's transportation. You don't have to have car spaces because people don't have cars. They use the public transportation and they live in high rises or they live in compacted buildings, but they're spatial. They're spatial. They're not, like Japanese style where you're living in 250 square feet. So when you do a form zoning plan, and planners look at the housing variety, then you can select what does it mean to have multifamily development? What do multifamily diversity mean in different types of houses that you can do? And here's a practical reason. In Austin, Texas, and Texas is kind of unique. And I used to talk to Mayor Hoskins about this because there's some areas and some cities in Texas that have no zoning. They do a separate regulation on building. And when that happens, seems to be just a lot of people investing. It's a booming area. Now, whether that means we're going to be, the country will be overflow, I don't know. But what Austin did is they experimented and did a program where they increased their inventory of multifamily dwellings. And guess what? Rents went down. Right now in Forest Park, rents are as expensive as buying a home. And again, first time people come in the Forest Park, I rented two, three places before I bought a home. My father certainly rented. And there's kind of a backlash against renters in town, you know, we don't, they're transient.
That's
And I've
longstanding.
heard different people say that, but I mean, those are all, again, kind of the popular theory. And if you don't really look at I'm glad you opened the whole series about, let's look at this, some of the information that's out there before we jump to these conclusions, you know. Um, so I think there's density you should be aware of that you don't want, but there's also density that is probably positive. Um,
Well,
and
how about
certainly there's, yeah, go ahead.
how about location for density though? You know, we're the lumber yard up at Brown and Des Plaines there is
Mm,
finally closing, and it's obviously going to be a sought after piece, and it's steps from the Green Line, not too far from the metro down River Forest
mm,
Way. What Something like that? That's where it makes sense as we're talking about housing when it comes to transportation. That maybe tell people about that side of things since you kind of touched on it. Building.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, again, there are people and there's ways you can pursue um, uh, adjusting your housing stock and getting involved in building. And listen, there's an economic side of building too. So, if, for example, I did a really rough estimate, and don't, you know, you can question my math on this on ADUs, those development units on the back. They roughly cost somewhere around $100,000 to build. This is a really rough estimate from the information I've taken in. It takes about 10 years to pay that off. But the point is, it also stimulates construction business, permits of, you know, business building permits. And I had discussions with Commissioner Glinky, and again, not to put him on the line, but I mean, the stuff I would just want to know is how many applications do we have for new buildings? How many applications do we have for new businesses? The UK experiments in a phrase that I love: old building, new use. You know, why not have that culture supply some of the places that we do have? And then, of course, we can expand on some of the new technology. I don't know, are there, I think, maybe one or two structures that are environmentally, you know, like LEED certified in Forest Park? I don't know if that's the case or not. But I mean, there are trends that are saying that that's important. And that always also helps the pollution issue too. Um, you know, Proviso put in $50 million on our campuses. And if you go look at Proviso East roof, it's a white roof. Um, PMSA probably has a white roof, so that would be in Forest Park. And then you'd have the scenario where in River Forest, they just passed it. You can't use gas operated. Those things, if they happen in Forest Park, would probably bring you greater depreciation of a graphic footprint, a carbon footprint, than than the green space. It's always been there, but the problem is it's not going to expand. We're landlocked. So the really only way you can do appropriate multifamily is smallest unit of multifamily is a two flat, the largest one being whatever you can conceive. And it doesn't necessarily mean 6 stories or 12 stories. It could also be placed where those buildings, like you have on the north side in that area, that TIF area, have commercial on the bottom. I think that's a fantastic idea. And we've not really played that up because planning hasn't gone into it where they could advise the powers that be to say, this is a good idea, let's pass this and see what goes. You know, when you were doing, you know, all the grants and appropriations, communities are passing Forest Park by because they're ready for projects like this. Our zoning is prohibiting us from even trying. So
Well,
that could be changed. So I mean, I don't know the answer of what kind of totally would it be, but there could be more density in certain areas, near commercial areas. Um, you know, it's funny if you track the history of Edsway and that whole block of Field Stevenson, towards the end were just still buildings. That used to be a commercial district. There was a bakery there. There was another small, you know, store there. Edsway had been there for a long time. It was a White Way before it was Edsway. So, and you know, old communities like Burnwood and Cicero all had these pockets of little walk to grocery stores, you know, type of thing. And that went by the wayside after World War II. You know, it just wasn't the taste of people who live in neighborhoods like that. They wanted a big yard, move out to Naperville or whatever. So we were kind of left with a limited structure. We can't really do a whole lot to it. All you can really do is up. They've done some of that modification. I think it's more appropriate towards commercial areas. I think Roosevelt Road has never been really totally prioritized for development like that. And we've got a lot of possible potential. But again, with no plan, Chris, how do you pursue this? You can't take advantage of something, you have to have these things in place.
Well, you know,
So, yeah.
having been on the council when we had our last comprehensive plan,
Mhm.
it wasn't it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on because nobody followed it, nobody cared, nobody referenced it after
Yeah,
about 6 months. It
right.
was okay, we have these meetings and we'll have the input and then it gets done and then poof, it gets filed away somewhere. What's the point of talking about uh, development on Roosevelt? What you're doing with open land space plans if
Right.
something comes becomes available, like the the government property on Roosevelt Road there.
Sure.
There's no, as you said, there's no not a lot of planning. Glinky alluded to some planning on Roosevelt Road last night, but wouldn't give any specifics. But there
Yeah,
is,
it's all kind of
as you said,
hodgepodge, and the ad hoc way of doing it is that every time something new comes up, you have to readdress the whole thing. Whereas the other process that I'm referring to, you'd have it vetted because it's appropriate to the things that we want them to do first. You know, developers want subsidies, but then they also, the village can ask, these are demands you need to do before you even start breaking ground. And I think there's the opportunity. But you're absolutely right. The comprehensive plan was the third one that I'm experienced with, and all of them just remained on the shelf, never were executed. Now, what do you need to execute a comprehensive plan or just a general plan? Well, you need a village council that's open-minded, that says, this is what we want to do. Let's find out. You need them to invest in a planning department, which is one more than one planner. You need them to have a regulatory crew that comes out to make sure that the builders are building in the right spaces and not just have a couple people. And I don't know what the capacity of the building department is now, but I would say Rutherford is probably Void Forest Park because they either know they're going to get a meeting with 300 people with pitchforks demanding it's too much density, and why waste your time? Even though the zoning doesn't necessarily say one way or another what you can do. But I think with form zoning, you used to have a design guideline. And the whole thing, who creates this? This is created by the community at large, along with the administration, along with other, I mean, it's a really open field for it. Forest Park's never gone that route. And I don't know if there's a will for it now. I'm an old guy. You're still young enough to really pursue something like this as far as getting people to at least talk about it. But it's going to take the whole village as a whole to say, we want this, let's pursue it. And it's up to the village to schedule it, pay for it, and get it started so that 2 5-year period, we're in a different boat than we are now. 10-year period, we're in a lot better boat than we are. And maybe some of the potential good designs that come in Forest Park would help people come to Forest Park again or sell. You know, uh, I've stayed in my house longer than I need to be, and that's probably another reason why I'm not leaving. I'm going to be leaving Forest Park in a year or two. Love the house. It's one of the oldest places in town. It's too big for my wife and I, but there's lots of seniors that are holding on to properties, not going to different places, downsizing. That's holding up things too, and they can't because they can't afford to. I've never seen. I don't know if you experience. You ever see really any neighborhood groups in Forest Park where you say, you know, we're the South Side Forest Parkers, and we're up for, you know, we're a very splintered community. We don't have a lot of um, community-wide, you know, groups that are fun and are able to do. You know, I mean, those are just social things that we have. I think they're all, you know, surmountable, but someone has to lead that. Maybe it's the mayor, maybe it's village council, maybe it's an organized public group. Um, my days of leadership are over. Not that I wouldn't facilitate, but I just think that it has to be important enough to the community to say, this is the kind of change you want to make. And you know, if you know planners, and I know you know something about planning, and you served as a public official, the thing about the planning profession is that there are really a lot of good people that do things that really serve the public. And it's the public that gets served, but at the same time, the private sector gets served for protections too. You know, your house is usually an individual, a family's the biggest investment, and if it's not protected and values fall abruptly, I don't know if values have fallen so much in Forest Park as much as they're increased, but I think they're artificially, and that's from the information I'm looking at. I'm not making that up. But what do you do when you have a property that's maybe a C property and they want 350 or $400,000 for it? It's not realistic. And then if the property goes dormant or it's private, it gets condemned, then we're back in the same boat where we are. So a lot of a lot of dark areas and a lot of gaps, but it seems that if the meeting, I've run these kinds of things before, Chris, and would have been two goals right at the beginning. Is number one, every person that gets in that meeting signs up, and every person they leave the meeting knowing the next meeting is coming. And I don't think that was done last night. I
It
thought
was not, no. And you're
that's
correct.
what
It
I
should have
do.
been
That's
done.
how you do connectivity. You do these workshops and you have a theme and you aggressively go with goals. Otherwise, they just become pissing matches and people get more confused.
I will
Um,
say this about the meeting. It was
yeah.
a mix of some old school people you've seen around forever and some faces I've
Mhm.
never seen before. And within that whole group, people and I also have to give credit to Commissioner Nero and Steve Glinke for opening the floor. Some of these town hall meetings are kind of done deals. The
Mhm.
last one they had on the Altenheim, you show up, no one's allowed to talk. There's no back and forth, and they took questions the whole time, and it was that to me was the refreshing part of it. Were the answers thorough? No. Were the answers what people wanted to hear necessarily? Not really. But at least they had an open dialogue, which in Forest Park is sometimes hard to get. And Bob, I should say we're winding down here. If there's something I haven't hit on that you want to hit on, please add that now.
Okay.
A couple minutes left here.
Well, I think real quickly with so that the that disease, as I call uh, trying to ask for the witch's broomstick, it goes on all the time in Forest Park. So you go to these meetings and you think you satiate the questions, and all of a sudden afterwards, no, I have more questions. Well, there's a limited amount of questions. You prioritize, you filter, you weed out important ones. We've got to focus on getting through that period so they can refine and get the best ideas, the best questions answered, so that we really have an idea visually what Forest Park's going to look like in the future. And we also have an idea that the plan we built is really good now, but we have to be consistent in making sure it gets reviewed and it constantly is improved. That's just a management technique in government altogether we can take advantage of. So um, I'm glad you had that. I'm wondering, again, maybe if your podcast can invite more people and talk on it, there would be enough people to say, hey, we've had two or three of these discussions online, and we've got a significant amount of people who want to talk about this. What do you say? I mean, to the village. And maybe they would respond, say, maybe you got something there. Let's go for it. Let's get together and let's make the conversation wider. I guess I lost you.
Oh, sorry, Bob. Yeah, there I am.
I don't know if I lost you or not.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm here. Yeah, and it was great that Commissioner Nero and Steve had a forum and allowed people to talk.
Mhm.
And I agree with you. This conversation, I didn't realize how many people were that passionate about it, and it was a great turnout. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that you were able to come on today and give your expertise and thanks for coming on. And any last words before we end this?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that Forest Park can do something about this. I think it's a matter of, I think I'm tired, and a lot of people are tired just the way the way it is in the country. You get in your own corner and you come out fighting. Let's not do that. Let's get together, get these discussions, and if we don't agree, agree to not disagree, but let's talk about it so we can get some solutions. And a lot of people like to criticize, but they don't like to give you a solution. And you know how that goes. You get blamed for stuff that, come on, let's just get it together and move forward. But I think that would be the way I would like to see Forest Park. And when I'm gone, then I could say that, people made a stand at this time and Forest Park became a better place because of it. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well said. Thanks. Our guest was Bob Cox. Great conversation, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Forest Park Town Hall podcast.